suffering at home, stuck, some ill, I hope that this piece can give you a little bit of joy, and hopefully it has the same healing power as it did then. This is a prayer by Men Harburg, and today with me on piano is Haeyoung Kim.
All right. Thank you for that, Dennis. It's my great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker for today. Dennis Kim has been a concertmaster of the Pacific Symphony since 2018, but he is also known for being one of the youngest concertmaster of the Hong Kong Philharmonic. He was 22 when he was named the youngest concertmaster the Tucson Symphony, and after that, he was the youngest concertmaster of the Hong Kong Symphony. After that, he's went on to play with guest concertmaster with every possible orchestra around the globe, and we're very happy to have him. He's also a dedicated educator, teaching at Interlaken, Royal Conservatory of Music in Toronto, Canada's Prisma Festival, and various other places. And he's also been to Cornell before, and while the chamber orchestra was preparing our performance of the Bartok Divertimento for strings, and it was one of the musical highlights of my time at Cornell. So I'm really excited for this conversation with Dennis. We will get to know him a little better, know about his musical pathways, and have your questions ready, as this is a great opportunity to interact with him. Welcome, Dennis.
Thank you so much. Usually I have a beautiful singing voice, but I don't know why I lost my voice right before this Zoom. But I apologize in advance. And like Chris was saying, when I was in Buffalo, I had a chance to come out to Cornell, and it was an eye-opening and memorable week for me also. It's the first time in my life that I'd been leading a rehearsal, and we went on break, and nobody got up, and then the concertmaster was like, "When can we get started up again? Because we got lots of notes to learn." And I was like, "Oh my, what's wrong with you guys?" And just that work ethic is why I know that why kids there are so successful, not only in music but in everything. So it was a fun week, lots of notes, but yeah, I miss being in Buffalo and having a chance to be around these incredible and incredibly gifted students. Yeah, before I agreed to doing this, Cornell sends me a letter saying, "Are you related to anyone at Cornell?" I'm not related to Chris at all. I've had a chance to work with him here and there. When he was in California, he helped us at Pacific Symphony a few times. But yeah, I grew up. I was born in Korea, but I grew up in Toronto, and so I grew up not as a typical musician. I didn't practice nine hours a day. I did everything, and I played violin. And at that time, Toronto was a small city, or smaller anyways. It's not this mega city that it is today. And so I didn't know what my level was compared to other kids in the world. And only when I auditioned for Curtis and got into Curtis, I realized, oh, maybe I could do this for a living. From Toronto, I went out to Curtis, and then I did my master's at Yale. And like Chris said, since then I've had a few different jobs, few too many jobs for my wife's liking, of course. And I've had a chance to actually play guest concertmaster in a lot of places, so I feel really lucky. And yeah, for me, music was it was I think it was a different time when I was young. Like everyone in my youth orchestra, we went into music. It's a little bit different now. There's a Pacific Symphony Youth Orchestra here, and just from what I remember, it's a lot better than the Toronto Symphony Youth Orchestra. But when you ask how many kids are going into music, I mean, we're talking 3-4 kids max. Kids are so smart. They're so good at so many things now. I remember when I was in youth orchestra, that's what we did. We're really good at violin. That's what we wanted to do. And it was a simpler time in some ways. And now you have these kids who are so good at their instruments and could have a life in music. But they could also work at Google or Facebook or Tesla or wherever. And so it's a little bit different time. And I was talking to Chris a little bit before we started, but then there's kids like you who are, I'm sure a lot of you guys could have taken a path to go to Juilliard or Curtis and do something else. But kids like you, when you graduate and enter the workforce, you're the people actually who will most likely save classical music in America anyways, because without you guys, without people who understand and people who appreciate, and then of course people who support the arts, arts in America is very difficult. I had a chance to work in Asia and in Europe, and it's totally different. Europe especially is 99% supported by the government. So if nobody came to the concerts, we'd still be fine financially. Asia a little bit less than full support, but still very heavily supported by the government. And as many of you know, in America, that's not the case. I mean, it's all with donations and support from individuals. Um, so we need you, brilliant people, um, either going into music or appreciating music. I mean, you're really a very important part of arts and in the future of US. Because what I realized during this pandemic is uh, everyone's job is essential. I mean, of course, doctors and nurses, but I realized how important my job was as a musician. Uploading some of these clips and getting feedback from some people saying, that really was so important. Thank you so much, and you have no idea how important what you're doing is. While I'm locked in at home and doing nothing, to be able to see some music, some interaction is so important. So I hope you realize, and I'm sure you guys do, but what you guys represent, what you will eventually represent, is a very, very important part to arts life in America. Sorry, maybe that's too much rambling, but and please, I hope that you guys have a lot of questions later on, because otherwise it gets very awkward and me and Chris start talking about ridiculous things.
So everybody, just so Dennis knows who you are, if, in the chat, if you could just put in your instrument, your major, and your favorite composer. So just put
Favorite composer? Oh, interesting. Who's your favorite composer, Chris?
Oh, my favorite composer. I mean, I'm always like working on whoever I'm working on becomes my favorite composer because I start doing a deep dive into. So the orchestras are in person. So we're working on Copland Appalachian Spring, Mahler's Fourth Symphony, the first and third movement. We're doing a great overture by Joseph Boulogne from his Anonymous Lover, which is a great overture. So we recorded that last Sunday. And then a student of ours played a Vivaldi guitar concerto.
Awesome.
We did sort of a Florence Price project where my son and a couple of the drone flyers shot the video of the orchestra playing, two orchestras playing outside, one outside Bailey Hall, one outside in the Arts Quad. So I'll put that in the link as well in the chat.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. No, for me, it's when I was at Yale as a grad student, our orchestra, and this was before the big donation, so it was not this incredible, full scholarship. Everyone, it was nothing like that. I mean, there were some very advanced kids, but some kids who were not very good at all. And every year, people would say, "Oh, the Yale Symphony is better than the Yale Philharmonic," and the Philharmonic is the grad school, and Yale undergrad symphony is just like you guys. I mean, no music majors, all doing it for the love of music. And I remember going to some of those concerts, and it was amazing. The passion, not only just the technical stuff, but the passion and the desire was so much greater than the grad school orchestra. So I was a little bit embarrassed, and so I really miss working with the students at Cornell. I'm sure it's equal to the level at Yale.
So, Dennis, one of the things that I really enjoy about the Pacific Symphony, whenever I have a chance to go and watch you perform, is that the orchestra seems to really enjoy playing with each other, and that there's that sense of community in that orchestra that's often rare a sight to see in a professional orchestra. Sometimes it feels like I'm watching a youth orchestra in the spirit that I see on stage. And I used to visit Tanglewood, and I would much rather see the TMC orchestra rather than the BSO. And this is no knock on BSO. It's just BSO is sort of on vacation mode, whereas TMC is like, this is my life. I'm going to put everything on the line mode. So could you talk a little bit about the challenge of keeping music as something that is really precious when you have to do it every day as a professional?
So I think one of our secrets is, so the Pacific Symphony is not like a regular orchestra where we rehearse every week and have a concert every week. It's probably I don't know if it's the only, but it's one of the only per service orchestras in America. So basically when we play, we get paid, and otherwise we don't. I mean, there's many reasons for this, but this orchestra was originally started by studio musicians in LA. So basically this was a side gig for people who were in studios from 10 to 5, working their butts off making movies and TV shows and commercials, and they wanted to play some real music at night, and so that's how this started. But I think that's one of our secrets. We don't play every week together, so when we're together, it's great to see each other, and it's very fresh. And another secret, I guess, is that we use a lot of subs, and whenever a sub comes, they're coming fully prepared. And because if they don't come fully prepared, that's the last time they'll be called to be a sub. So that's one of the secrets that Pacific Symphony has. But especially during this pandemic and this past year, I realized, and I think all my colleagues realized that, really it's a privilege to play music and make that be our livelihood. When others go to an office and sit in front of a computer for 10 hours a day, we get to play Haydn and Mozart and Beethoven. And so I feel that all of us now appreciate it much more, and I don't think we'll ever take it for granted ever again. Waiting for the next pandemic, of course, but it's been a really an eye-opening year for us because yeah, we all took it for granted. Go to work, you rehearse and you play concerts, and there's audience and you get a paycheck, and that's how life goes. And without audience, without the camaraderie, without being on stage with my colleagues, I mean, it's been really difficult, to be honest. Doing things through Zoom and recording things is one thing, but not being in person, not playing, and not sharing what we've been taught to do our whole lives. It's been a very difficult year, and luckily we're back and slowly coming back, and hopefully we'll be completely back soon. But yeah, it's I think this year has taught us all a lot, and I'm sure for students too. I can imagine much more for the students how difficult it's been.
Yeah, we've been lucky to, Cornell's been very lucky to have a very rigorous testing protocol. And we've been in person this whole year, unlike many other institutions.
Mm,
But it's only since March 29 that the orchestra was given clearance to be
right.
rehearsing in person. And that first couple of weeks, it just felt like it was such a privilege to be back in person rehearsing and making music together. Um, so,
I mean, yeah. Today's the first day. Actually, we're going to be recording, of course, so it's going to be filmed. But we're having 20 of our donors or supporters in the hall, and I really have a feeling that not only the donors will be crying, but the players, because I mean, just it's been so long, and I think it's going to be very emotional. And so, in some ways, I can't wait, and in some ways, I'm going to be wearing glasses and mask, and it's going to be a mess. And I have to play Vivaldi tonight, so it's yeah, it's and today's a special day for us.
so you just mentioned briefly that Pacific Symphony, many of the players also work as studio musicians. Have you had any sort of sightings of famous composers from these studio gigs?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I mean, my family and my extended family, of course, they all know I play violin, and I've had some impressive jobs, and I've played in some big halls. But when I told them that I played Star Wars, they're like, "Oh my God, you must be really good." So I had the chance to play the last Star Wars movie, and it's amazing because John Williams actually conducts himself, and these are 6 hour sessions, and he's standing the whole 6 hours, and I think he's in his mid 80s, and the energy that he has is amazing. And so I've been lucky and to be out here, and that group is an amazing group because they can sight read anything. Even for a movie like Star Wars, we don't get the music ahead of time. You sit down and you have to play it perfectly the first take because every take and time is money in that studio. You can imagine. So, but I've had a chance, yeah, to play Star Wars and Toy Story, and most recently we just did Sing 2. I mean, maybe you guys don't know that movie, but I have little kids, so I watched Sing 50 times and cried every time, of course. And
It's a
yeah,
good movie.
it's a great movie. Oh my gosh, like my favorite movie. I don't know if I'm allowed to admit that, but yeah, and the voices in that. I mean, I don't know who sings that stuff, but that's amazing. And so yeah, so for me, I've had a chance to be part of that a little bit. And now the Pacific Symphony, I mean, there's just a few of us who do it, but I think when this started 30 years ago, I mean, 99% of the orchestra was studio musicians. So of course there was more work back then. I heard at one point Fox, Sony, and Warner Brothers each had their own orchestra, and that's not the case anymore. There's a little bit less. A lot of it's being shipped to Eastern Europe and Asia and places that are obviously much more affordable. But I think still quality wise, I think the studio musicians in LA are really the top. I mean, I can't, I mean, they can be in any orchestra in the world, I think, if they decided, but they would be taking a pay cut to join the New York Phil. So that's why they stay in LA, I think.
So, during the pandemic, all of our students, I think, either a pattern emerged where they practice a whole lot more, or they just stop playing altogether. How are you sort of keeping up your chops during this pandemic, because you're playing much less? There's you're forced to be separated. And I know you have two wonderful children who also play instruments. How do you encourage? Because I'm trying to figure out how to encourage my kid to keep playing the cello. So what's your secret sauce of
Yeah, I mean
motivated?
yeah, that's a great question, because I have some students who improved, I mean, incredibly over the pandemic. They improved 5 years worth, and then some kids who really stopped practicing, and I mean, they basically have given up violin. So it's like you said, it's the whole spectrum. For me, because I had all these Zoom things and donor Zooms and little recordings I had to make, I had to keep in shape. I didn't have the chance like some of my colleagues to just leave our instrument in the locker and go on a semi vacation. So that's what kept me in shape. But I can imagine it's just hard when there's nothing going on to just get out your instrument and practice an hour just for the sake of practicing. Because yeah, I mean, I'm not that kind of person. I don't practice just to practice. I practice for concerts, for rehearsals, for certain things. So I can imagine when everything's shut down and there's no concert in sight, that it's hard to be motivated. But yeah, my girls, both of them, they kept on with their lessons, even though it was through Zoom. So that was their motivation to practice for their lesson. And yeah, so sometimes I was encouraged by kids practicing that I would practice. And so it's been tough. I mean, and to be honest, it's a little. I feel a little bit that I'm getting back into shape now because we're playing a lot more Pacific Symphony. But yeah, I can imagine for you guys who are not music majors to practice their instrument when they have a lot of this studying to go on without any concerts. I mean, yeah, that would be a little bit too much for me. I'd be like, no, forget it. That sounds ridiculous. That's not worth it. You know, the reason I'm doing this is to play together with my friends and make amazing music and go on fun tours and make recordings. But now, to be socially distanced and not know when the next concert is must be very difficult.
Yeah, so we basically asked our students in the fall semester to take lessons and play chamber music as much as possible. But one of the things that we started to talk about was this inequity in classical music. So we had an amazing array of speakers during the fall semester. We met Daniel Bonnard-Romain, Aaron Flagg, all of these great BIPARC artists and composers, talking about this inequity, the structural issues that are quite problematic in classical music. How have you been seeing the field respond to these sort of sea change of sudden awareness of these inequities?
Yeah, I mean, this is a tricky question. Coming from me, from an orchestral standpoint, and especially in America, everything is screened, 100% screened, so we can't see who's behind the screen. And recently, we've had discussion if that's good or bad, and if the screen wasn't there, would more minorities be hired? And again, I don't know what the right answer is, but because the union is so strong, we have these rules set in place. I had a chance to work in Finland, and after I won the job, after a few months, the conductor told me, how I won the job, and especially in the finals, I was up against another. So I was working in Finland, so I was up against two other Finns, and after we all played, there was a discussion, and one gentleman just stood up and said, "We've never had a foreign concertmaster," and he sat down. That's all he said. We didn't talk about the playing, didn't talk about anything. And so I know this kind of stuff is there, and these kind of feelings, and I wish that I had a better answer, but I think that these changes take a long time. As many of you know, the top conservatories in America or anywhere in the world, there are a lot of Asian students. But if we talk about our orchestra, which is the best orchestra in the world, like I was talking about in the studios, it's there's two, three minorities, and it's pretty much an old boys club. How does this change? I wish I knew the answers, and I guess you guys will be kind of responsible for making this change, the next generation. But as an orchestral musician in America, anyways, because the rules are so strict, I don't know what we can do to help create more opportunities for minorities, especially African Americans. I mean, we have one black horn player, but when you look in our community, I think the orchestra should look like the audience, and there certainly isn't one African American in the audience. There's many more, and ideally, yeah, the orchestra should look like our audience, and I'm happy to hear your suggestions and discuss this, but I don't know if I have a good answer, and this is something we need to discuss, and I think this is something that needs to be talked about for sure.
Yeah, I think these discussions are starting to happen in many different levels, both at the sort of the upper artistic levels, in the administrations, in institutions, and I think these conversations are beginning to happen in many different places. So in some ways, it's not enough that the conversations are taking place, and that those conversations should lead to changes and initiatives and projects to help diversify not only the personnel but the programming as well. Yeah.
No, I 100% agree. The one issue we have in America is because of the way it's structured financially. It actually has nothing to do with minorities or even anything. I mean, if we don't do the Tchaikovskys and the Beethovens and Brahmses, people won't buy tickets, and when people don't buy tickets, then organizations get nervous, and so that's the bottom dollar is sometimes the most important thing for these for the management. If you program a lot of stuff, it doesn't matter if it's black composer, or white composer, brown composer. If it's not interesting and if it's not something that the audience wants to hear, they just won't come to the concert. And it's a little bit different in Asia and Europe. When I was in Finland, almost every week we had a new piece, and it was amazing for the musicians and the audience. I think eventually appreciated, but I think that took a long time. Because everyone loves to hear Tchaikovsky 5. Everyone loves to hear Four Seasons and Beethoven 5. And when you see a composer, especially a living composer, a piece that's a little atonal, it makes some of the donors nervous, and the donors that are coming tonight, there's only 20 of them, but I have a feeling those 20 people, they don't want to hear Jesse Montgomery's Starburst that we're doing tonight. They want to come for the Vivaldi Four Seasons. So, and like I said, this is a responsibility for the next generation, and I'm just passing it on to you. Since I couldn't do it, I'm sure you guys can. But it's like Chris said, I think this is not only discussion that has to be had, but we need to, action has to be taken, and we need to start programming music by living composers, not only African American and Asian, but just living composers first. I think that's important, because I think there's too much of our, especially in America, too much of our programming is done just to make a dollar and just to keep finances safe. And of course I understand that's important, but that can't be the only reason. Because I keep on telling people, the orchestra business model is not a business model at all. It's guaranteed to fail. If you're trying to make money by creating an orchestra, I mean, that's the wrong business, because it's there to try to make the society better, not to make money. And I don't know any orchestra maybe in the world that makes money, maybe Berlin Phil, maybe, but I think it's basically there as to make the society better, to make the community better. So it's not a business model, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you mentioning that orchestras in Europe, in Asia, are heavily subsidized by the government. Berlin Philharmonic, for example, they're all actually employees of the city of Berlin. That's the where they get the contract from.
Exactly.
And of course, they get funding from their tours and their digital concert hall and all of that. But their main source of income actually comes from the city of Berlin. And so I think people sometimes forget that. And I think when you have government support in some ways guaranteed income, where you don't actually have to worry about the bottom line of the box office, that allows you to be much more adventurous. And in
Absolutely.
some ways, the LA Phil's model of the Hollywood Bowl is, the Hollywood Bowl is where they play the Star Wars and Strike Five and all of those fireworks pieces to support the very adventurous programming of the regular season in Disney Hall.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think this mechanics that we have of American orchestras relying on private donations naturally tends to skew programming in a very conservative, safe way. Yeah.
No, I mean the couple that actually sponsors my chair. I mean they're great friends, and I love them to death. They don't want to hear anything uh, after Shostakovich. And Shostakovich is right at the limit of what they're willing to take. And is their opinion wrong? No, I mean they're the ones who are paying the big bucks to donate, have their name attached to my chair. So their opinion is also important. But there are enough people like that that it makes the conductor and the CEO nervous about programming Jesse Montgomery and programming Price and living composers. But I think as musicians we have to keep on pushing and keep asking because otherwise, our art will die. I mean, if we continue playing Beethoven and only Brahms, which are great, of course, don't get me wrong. I think that eventually, I think that this stops, and that would be a tragedy, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, I'm always trying to figure out how to um, go to arenas and areas of knowledge where I feel uncomfortable or I don't have enough information, and that's sort of a good sign for me in terms of
Mm,
how I stay interested and activating my mind and intellectual curiosity. Because as soon as I feel like, oh, okay, I don't know this composer, or I had no idea this composer wrote in this genre, that's when I sort of my neurons start firing in rapid response, because that means I have a arena of knowledge where it's not sort of given, or I'm not going to be going on automatic pilot because I've done this piece 50 times.
mm.
So I'm always trying to figure out that boundary of where is it that I'm uncomfortable in terms of knowledge or repertoire. Um,
Right.
uh,
I mean, I'm of course I'm a huge fan of new music and I strongly believe in playing music of living composers. That being said, there's a lot of bad new music out there. I mean, there's more bad new music than good new music, and it's hard to find the good stuff. And I remember I was in a concert in Berlin, and it's amazing. It was like a 4:30 on a Sunday, not near the center of Berlin at all, and it was a quartet concert, and nothing was written. I'm gonna say nothing was written before 2005, and it was the most atonal, the most difficult music ever. And I was looking around, and everybody's sleeping. Everyone's sleeping, and again, these tickets are not cheap. Everyone's sleeping. End of the concert, standing ovation. And so, I mean, it's like I said, we have to find good new music, and there's enough good new music out there that needs to be played. But there certainly is plenty of bad new music. So don't get me wrong. I don't like just anything. I mean, it has for me. It has to be written well. It has to be done correctly. So
yeah, I totally agree with you. I think in Haydn's day, one of Haydn's main rival was Pleyel, and so nobody plays Pleyel anymore. But in Pleyel and Haydn's when they were living, Pleyel was like considered like John Williams of the time, and Haydn was considered I don't know a much lesser composer. So in terms of that sifting of time, sifting of repertoire, I think. What is the answer? Is it to go and play as much music as possible, and then try to find the one gem or the one piece that you think is going to last the test of time, or is it that you allow because the in a way I'm married to a composer, and I see this struggle with how my wife deals with um, uh, the the attitudes of musicians of, I don't have time to explore your piece because you might not be a good composer, but
Right.
they're not even like giving her the chance to share their music. So I think I think there is a sort of a built-in shifting that we all have to go through as musicians because we can't rely on somebody else to do the shifting for us. So I think we should, some percentage of our time and effort should go into exploring composers that we don't know, and maybe there's a unknown piece by a famous composer that does need to be looked at. Or so, what's your take on exploring repertoire?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I mean, now that we have things like YouTube, I mean, that's a great tool. I mean, I remember the program we did in at Cornell. We did Golyov and Bartok. You try to pull that off somewhere else, like here, they'd be like, "We're not doing those two pieces." I mean, Golyov alone is too hard, or Bartok alone. We got to add that with the Beethoven Five. But I love that you take risks, and luckily you don't have to sell tickets, and we're not going to go bankrupt if we if the concert hall is not filled. But yeah, I mean, for me, once you click on something, a new composer on YouTube, then it links to something else, and sometimes you can take spend hours just listening to new things. And like I said, some of it's really bad, but some of it's amazing. And for me, I think that when people ask me, can you play Tchaikovsky? Can you play blah blah blah? I know a lot of people who can play Tchaikovsky a lot better than me, and I want to play music of living composers. Some of them that I know well, and some of them that I want to support. So sometimes composers ask me, why do you play new music, and why do you support new music? And because in my opinion, I think if I don't, who will? And and then also, like I said, I'll leave it up to Hilary Hahn and Josh Bell to play Tchaikovsky. I will take care of the lesser known stuff, because I think that I think there's a few composers that I played all over the world. I mean, you're Korean, so but a friend of mine wrote a piece, and it's a modern piece. He's a Danish slash German composer, and I played it in Daegu in Korea. And it's Iowa, and like they were like, "You want to play what? You Can you just play Sarasate or Carmen Fantasy? What's going on?" I was like, "No, I want to play this. I think this is important. And I think it's a good piece. And I think the orchestra will like it. I think the audience, it's effective." And yeah, I mean, we got through the concert, no injuries, and no one threw anything. And will it be played again there? I don't know, but I think that's my responsibility, to try to play this in as many places as possible. And for me, we have a lot of tools now, and so we can find new music a lot easier than when we were younger, Chris. I mean, we had to go to the library, take out a laser disc, and try to figure out what's been recorded. But now everything's on our phone, everything's on YouTube. It's amazing. So it's a lot easier these days than it was.
Yeah, we have a question in the chat. Danielle, would you want to ask it yourself?
Yes. I was just wondering, how do you store the Strad? Is there a special case? Because I feel like, you got to take good care of that.
That's a good question, and it's a valid question. But my case is a normal case. I actually have a case that was made in Korea that's $200. So don't tell the donor that. But I gotta be careful with the humidity and the heat and stuff like that. But I don't have a special case for it. But I think anyone's violin, if it's valuable, doesn't matter if it's like my violin, worth $9 million, or your violin that's worth $10,000 or $5,000. I mean, it's still very precious and important to us. So keeping it in good shape, but I don't have a special case. And yeah, sometimes when I think about it, if I was carrying around $9 million in cash, I'll probably have 3 bodyguards and the handcuffs and all that stuff. But yeah, it's weird that I just walk around with this, but luckily it's insured, and my violin actually it's kind of impossible to steal. If you wanted to steal my violin and sell it, I mean, if you wanted to play yourself, you could steal it, but there's no way you can sell my violin because it's so heavily documented, and people can recognize it right away. Whereas someone's violin was $100,000, you can steal that and sell it on the black market, no problem. So if you're looking to steal a violin, don't steal a Strad. It's just not worth it unless you want to play it. I mean, you heard that crazy story. I don't remember, but someone stole a violin backstage, and he played it his whole life. And he was like a restaurant and bar musician. And on his deathbed, he admitted that he stole this violin and he gave it back. So But yeah, but I mean, unless you're gonna use it yourself, you can't sell it because, like I said, it's too heavily documented, and without papers, you can't sell it. And if you're trying to sell it and you don't have papers, they're gonna be like, wait, how did you get this violin? So, but to answer your question, no, I don't have a special case. Um, but just recently, actually, a friend of mine who lives in Asia, of course, he got Hermes to make a oboe case for him. So I said, if Hermes can make a violin case for me, I'll consider that.
Um, I've always wanted to ask you this. So, have you ever had a soloist, a violin soloist, who comes to play with an orchestra and then notices that you're playing on this amazing violin and say, "Hey, can I use your violin for the concert?"
Everyone notices. Nobody has asked that yet, luckily, and I don't know if that would be kosher. Um, that being said, when I was in Korea, there was this young Russian violinist, amazing, and Korea was a third world country, so he didn't bring his good violin. So he brought a modern violin, and it's a modern Christoph Landon, who's a new maker who's very famous, but it's a modern violin. It's $5,000, $10,000, and he played the first rehearsal and it didn't sound great. So I was like, okay, man, you can't use that violin. So I gave him my violin. He played the concert, and in the reviews, it was like, oh my God, so and so plays this modern violin and it sounds better than any violin in the world. And that was my Strat, of course. So. But no, it's humbling because very few times does a soloist come in with a violin that's better than mine or more valuable than mine, and so I feel very lucky that I get to use this violin kind of indefinitely. And yeah, I played it when I was out there at Cornell, and it's I've had it for 13, 14 years, and in my 14 years, it's traveled all over the place. Last time I took it, actually, I took it to Lebanon to play a concert, and then someone in the orchestra was like, "I'm not sure if that violin would be insured in Lebanon, so you shouldn't have brought it." I'm like, "That's good to know. Maybe tell me before next time." But I brought this to Lebanon. I brought it to Cuba. Probably also not. If something happened there, I probably couldn't have collected either. But yeah, even in my 14 years that I've had it, first of all, I've lived in Hong Kong, Korea, Finland, Buffalo, and California. And so it was made in 1701, so I can imagine the history before that. I mean, it's exactly like the red violin. I mean, there must be so many stories about this violin and any violin. I mean, any of you guys who have instruments. I mean, it's unless it's a modern instrument, the history must be incredible. How it got to your hands. So yeah, I feel very lucky.
I mean, I think a violin like that, you should have sort of a historian who kind of tags all the stories that goes along with that instrument.
Absolutely.
So you should have a historian like documenting all the concerts that you do, what repertoire it's played on.
Yeah, I mean that's totally true. They can make it a Korean drama. It'd be awesome. My wife can write the music, and we could film it at Cornell with your son's drone. It'd be awesome.
Sounds good. So everybody, otherwise you're gonna keep hearing my head keep talking. So put your questions in the chat and raise your hand function. So Dennis, one of the things that I always find as a Korean American, having immigrated to the U.S. when I was 12, is that I always feel like I'm the perennial outsider. So in the U.S., I feel like an outsider. When I go to Korea, I feel like an outsider. You live in all these different places. Can you talk about that feeling of the foreign person coming into the concertmaster seat and leading that orchestra? What that feels like in the U.S., in Hong Kong, in Finland, in Korea. What is that like for you?
Yeah, I mean, of course, every situation has been a little bit different, and of course, that's the beauty of America. Since there isn't a real American, there's no original American. Whereas in Finland and Korea, there are Finns and there are Koreans. So that's the beauty of America. I don't feel like I'm not, except the fact that I'm Canadian, of course. I don't feel that that guy doesn't belong here because he's not from the U.S. I mean, we're all American. You land in America, you're American. But in Finland, yeah, it's totally true. I mean, I was the first not foreign concertmaster in any Finnish orchestra in Finnish history. And when someone told me that, I was like, that can't be true. And then they say, well, yeah, it's kind of not. I mean, there's Russians, but it's like a neighbor, so they feel like they're almost the same. But I was the first non Finnish or Russian. And in Korea, I think that my tenure in Korea actually went smoothly because I wasn't 100% Korean or I wasn't 100% foreigner. I was a little bit of both. So there were things that I understood, and then some things that I really didn't understand. And I think that helped me while I was there, because there's some things that are just totally ridiculous. And if I was a Korean person, I would not understand. And vice versa, if I was purely a foreigner and had no idea about Korean culture, I wouldn't understand. But there were some things that it was I didn't fully understand it, but I understood that it was in the realm of possibility. Yeah, it's the idea of having a foreign concertmaster, and I fully understand that too, because in Finland they had this tango group actually go to Carnegie Hall, and this was a Finnish tango group going to Carnegie Hall, and the conductor asked me if I could be guest concertmaster, and I was like, I don't know what that would look like. If I was a New York ticket buyer and I go to a Finnish tango concert and there's an Asian guy playing concertmaster, I don't know why that was weird, but I thought that was weird. And so I understand some of these biases and stereotypes, of course. When you see the Seoul Philharmonic and you see a French concertmaster, you're like, is this the Seoul Philharmonic? I don't really understand. And luckily you don't have that in America or Canada or Australia, because like I said, there's no American, there's no Canadian. Certain places have been more difficult, certain places have been less difficult, but ultimately you have to try to prove yourself just with your playing. It's nothing to do with the way you look or where you're from. I think after I played and after I got the confidence of my colleagues with my playing, I think everything got a little bit easier. And that happened everywhere. And if you don't convince them, and if you don't win your colleagues over with your playing, then it doesn't matter if you're from that country. I think that it's gonna be difficult. So luckily for me, I haven't had too much trouble being a foreigner in I guess in everywhere I've been, because I haven't actually been concertmaster in Canada. So even in America, I am officially Canadian, and I'm very proud to be Canadian and not American in some ways. Yeah, it's like you said earlier, I feel lucky because a lot of the times I've had someone who's really been a big supporter, and usually that's the conductor who hired me. So they've always shielded me a little bit or protected me, and so I'm grateful to people who helped me and helped my family make the transition, especially in Finland. We get there, and really we're one of 9 Asian families in that city, and I remember walking around in Finland, and you see another Asian person, and you don't know who they are, but you get this head nod, hey, you're surviving in this freezing weather. And so it's I mean it's I know my wife always complains that we've moved around too much, but I think that hopefully my kids will appreciate later that they've been introduced to so many different cultures and lived in so many different places. Because I remember growing up, there were friends of mine who never left Ontario, let alone Canada. They grew up there, and they lived there. And I would ask, don't you travel? It's like, why, everything's in Toronto. And I guess that's kind of true. Like, you've never been to Europe or Asia? No, why? I mean, everything's here, sort of. I mean, I think going to Taco Bell doesn't mean you've been to Mexico. I think that times are changing now, and especially with my daughters, they've had a chance to live in Asia and in Europe and in different parts of the U.S., which is also a different country. I mean, New York and California are 2 different countries. I would say San Francisco and Southern California is 2 different countries, but that's neither here nor there.
So, Dennis, I'm going to switch gears and talk about education. You've had a number of teaching roles at the Royal Conservatory in Toronto, at Interlaken, but you've also recently, over the last couple of summers, teaching a violin masterclass in the island of Jeju in Korea. Would you talk a little bit about that particular project, whether that is going to continue, and what it means to have projects like that?
Yeah, I mean that was a dream of mine, actually. I think most musicians, they dream of having their own festival one day and trying to give back. And after an incredibly successful first year, not financially successful, but very emotional and successful first year, COVID, of course, wiped that out. And looks like again this year because of the quarantine situation. But yeah, it was a chance for there were four faculty members who lived all everywhere. So one lived in New York, I lived here. One was coming from the UK, and then we had one soloist who lives everywhere, I guess. And these students, there were four teachers and I would say 15 students. So the teacher student ratio was amazing. They had lessons every day. They had performance opportunities every day, master classes every day. And in the final little, Q&A and feedback, I mean, a lot of kids' parents, they actually cried. And I'm not going to admit it, of course, but I also cried when I spoke to them because so many of them in that 1 week improved so much. And I think had their eyes opened, and to kind of see what the world could offer musically. Because a lot of these kids were Korean kids who practiced 9 hours a day and were very, very gifted and had amazing technique, but a lot of them didn't know why they played violin actually, and they didn't know what they were going to do with their skills. They were like, "Well, I guess you go to college and then that's it," and they just didn't ever think about it. And it's a little bit different culture because from a young age, from maybe my first year at Curtis, my dad kept on asking, "When are you going to start making money? When are you gonna make money?" And that's not the way they think in Korea, anyways. I don't know about all of Asia, but basically the goal of playing violin is to get into college because it's so hard to get into college. And so to teach these young kids, some as young as 12, 13, and then we had an adult student who was 40, and she came and same thing. She was so moved because the teachers were so involved and so dedicated to helping them just for that 1 week, and helping them improve and helping them broaden their horizons. So it was a very for me anyways, a memorable a week, and hopefully that'll happen again. But it'll have to be next summer because no one, especially from the U.S., can go there quarantine for 2 weeks to do a 1 week festival. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I'm always trying to figure out with our students at Cornell is that, I think every year I think I listen to maybe 300 to 400 musical supplements. And then, so I end up with all these students who are on campus that should be showing up, and then I never see them, right? Because
Right.
they basically used the instrument that they play as a sort of a tool by which they get into college. And then I see a whole bunch of students. I never saw a musical supplement from them. And then they show up, and in some cases they're better than the ones who submitted a musical supplement. And I go, why didn't you submit a musical supplement? It's like, oh, I'm an engineering major. So it's like it doesn't enter their mind that they could have used that as a tool, while another set of students are using playing an instrument only as a tool to get into college.
Right.
So that balance, and so as a teacher, as a parent who has a child who plays an instrument, how do I instill this love for playing music that is not a tool, that is not a brief 4 years of their life or 5 years, but it becomes a lifelong gift that they own as a thing they enjoy and they play, even though they're not a major, even though it doesn't bring them income. It's just something they love doing, right? And then they pass on that love. So I'm always trying to figure out what is that balance, the magic formula that if you're a parent, if you're a teacher, how do you give that love towards a child who's learning an instrument? Because I think so many times you encounter teachers who are positioning the student. You have to do these things to get into college. You have to do these things to have a career. You have to do these things in order to get better. But the thing that's missing from the conversation is, what do you do to instill love for this thing you call music?
You didn't say there's gonna be any tough questions. What's going on here, Chris?
Sorry.
I mean, and of course, that's the question that I deal with every day. I mean, all my students here in Southern California, they're so gifted, but very few of them want to go into music, or some of them use violin to get into Cornell, to get into Stanford, and that's their ultimate goal. I teach all of my students as if their goal is to become a professional musician. And I fully understand that many of them will not do that. But if if your goal is to be an amateur musician, then you'll never reach that level of becoming an amateur musician. I think the love of music, I think, comes from proficiency and being good at your instrument. I think that if you strive to be the best, then you can use those skills even if you don't go into music. And those skills that you've learned as a child, you can use them. When you go to Cornell and you're not a music major, and when you were young, you played scales, you learned to play in tune. I promise you, it's going to be a lot more fun playing in the Cornell Orchestra. Where if you as a child learned violin or any instrument just trying to be an amateur and kind of did it as a hobby, you're not going to be at the level where you can enjoy doing it as a hobby. So for me, I always have the same conversation when I take on a new student. I say, I fully understand you might not go into music, but I, as a teacher, will be teaching you and pushing you as if you're going to be auditioning for Juilliard, Curtis, Colburn. That's my goal. And if you don't, you'll have the skills that you can enjoy being an amateur musician, enjoy playing in the Cornell Orchestra. And many of you, when you graduate, every city in America for sure, but every city in the world has a doctor's orchestra. That doctor's orchestra has the best instruments and the most money, and they put on the best concerts. And I promise you, you're going to be in those things. And if you appreciate it, and if you're good at what you do, it'll be much more fun playing chamber music if you took it seriously and learned your instrument to the level that you obviously need to. When I was there, I mean, there were a lot of violinists anyways that I'm sure could have gone to Juilliard or could have gone to a conservatory who decided to come to Cornell, and they still had chops. It was amazing to see these kids go up and down their instruments playing Mahler, and again, the work ethic was something that was the most surprising for me. These kids are like, we have 2.5 hours. Why are we taking a break? We got lots to do. And that work ethic sometimes is not in the music students. And so a combination of that work ethic and musical desire and talent that's what makes a successful musician, I think. So so that's and I've told all my students, including kids who come when they're 5-6 years old, who have no idea if they're going to have a life in music, but my goal as your violin teacher, that's how I'm going to teach you. And because my kids, they take math as a tutor or whatever, tennis. They're not trying to become professional tennis players or mathematicians, but if you don't strive for that, you're not going to reach any level is my opinion. So
Yeah, the thing I've always said to parents is that they have no problem putting a kid in Little League baseball and having the coach and the team strive for excellence, right? And no one in that Little League baseball team, maybe one or two parents, has a goal of my kid is going to be in the Dodgers, LA Dodgers, right? Most parents no, I want my kid to have fun, learn a few skills, but basically enjoy their time spending with each other through the tool of baseball, right? But that concept gets lost somehow when it comes to playing an instrument, because so many of the time sometimes the parent, sometimes the teacher says, okay, I'm happy if I produce one Joshua Bell out of 10,000 students, right? And then that's the model that they use, right? But in that process, what happens is the music making becomes somehow riddled with, it becomes absence of joy, right? It becomes a path towards a single point entry of the tiny hole that you can enter through. And so I love to hear that you demand the same high standard from the students, and so that's really inspiring.
Yeah, for me, I mean, the joy of music and the love of music comes from you being good at it. I can't imagine you playing out of tune with bad rhythm and enjoying the piece that you play. That's not fun, and that's not fun playing chair music with someone who can't get around their instruments. So for me, to get to an amateur level, you have to strive to be a professional, and then you'll be a great amateur, and you'll love music because you'll know what it takes to become a great musician. So that's always been my attitude, and I think that my teachers always taught me like that. I mean, they didn't know I was going to go into music. I started with my teacher when I was 7. I was 7 years old. How do they know that this is what I want to do? I was an excellent hockey player. I could have been in the NHL, no problem, if I grew to 6'4". But they didn't know that. So, but that's the attitude I think that I need to take, because as soon as I start teaching kids to become amateurs, they're not even reached amateur status, and wasting time and money and there's so, especially these days, these kids, their time is so valuable, and they do 15 things. So if you're not going to take it seriously, just not doing it is much better, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. So I would rather that our students ask those questions. So I'm gonna poke somebody. Okay.
Can I ask a favor?
Yeah.
I mean, unless you guys are in bed or something, can you guys all turn your cameras on? It's so nice to see Danielle, but to see all these, yes, thank you. My gosh, it's so nice to see human faces. Again, unless you're unable to, if you're driving or something, but yeah, it's nice to see people.
All right, Aiden, since you turned on a question, I'm turning on your video. You can ask a question, Aiden.
Oh no, you're putting me on the spot. I feel attacked. I guess sort of branching off, like, we've been talking a lot about inequality in orchestras, and you mentioned, you have this Strad violin that's, sort of like, I don't want to say like a status object, but like you don't walk into a room and people don't notice it. Have you ever felt as though you got treated differently because of that?
This is I don't know if you guys know any Finnish people, but Finnish people are very direct, and yeah, they're not politically correct. But I had a physical therapist actually because of my shoulder, and he read up about me, and he said, "Do you have a Strad because you're good, or are you good because you have your Strad?" And that question made me think, and also made me want to punch him in the face. But so first of all, when I come to an audition or anything, people don't know that I have a Strad, and unless you're really paying attention, if you saw my fiddle, you wouldn't be like, "Oh, that's a Strad." So unless you're an expert, so for me, that doesn't really come into play. Do I have an advantage when I go to an audition because of my instrument? Of course I do. But I think, unfortunately, that's part of the game. Unless you're playing piano or you're a voice major, that's always part of it, right? If someone has an amazing flute and your flute is $500, the person with the $5,000 flute is going to have an advantage. So, yeah, to get back to your question, I mean, I think that I am lucky that I have my Strad, and these things are unfortunately part of the game. I don't know if that answers your question at all, by the way.
Yeah, I think it does.
And yeah, and especially in America, our principal bass audition, we just had it, and he played, and the sound was incredible. And we, as a committee, wanted to ask, is this your bass, and will you be bringing this bass to work? Because in Asia especially, a lot of kids, they rent instruments for auditions, and they'll rent whatever, a Strad, and they sound amazing, and then they win the job, and then they bring their $4,000 violin, and that's a little bit cheating. But unfortunately, in America, because the union's so strong, you can't even ask that question. So I thought that was funny. But yeah, the music union in America is something very special, and that needs a whole hour in itself. Because what I heard is the music union is second only. I mean, only the truck drivers union is stronger. I think the music union is second to the truck drivers union. And their strength is not always. I mean, it's important, but sometimes it's negative and positive, of course.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a pendulum situation, right? Because a long time ago, musicians had so few rights, they could be fired on the spot by the conductor. So in response to those terrible working conditions, the union became stronger.
We had crazy situations where European conductors would look at someone and be like, "I don't like the way you look," and fire you. And now, of course, we've shifted a little bit the other way. If your rehearsal goes to 1 o'clock and you have 5 measures to go, the union guy will stand up, and at 1 it'll stop. With 5 measures to go, you can't finish, and those kind of rules are there. That's also not. I don't think that's correct either. But you can't find the right balance. It's either it has to be black and white, I think.
All right. Well, we've come to the end of the hour. So we always like to take a group photo at the end of our session. So I'll take a group photo. So let's see. Here we go. One, 2, 3. All right. Dennis, thank you so much. If you have to jump to your next class or go get a meal, do so. He's agreed to stay on a few minutes longer for any of you who were too shy to ask a question. So,